You're overthinking. It lands like a whisper, but it feels like a verdict. It shows up in small moments. Driving down the highway, no traffic, just the steady hum of tires on asphalt. Waiting on your coffee at Starbucks, staring at a name on the cup that isn't yours. Someone's talking to you, and you realize you didn't hear a word. You're overthinking, and somehow it doesn't feel like an opinion. It feels like a diagnosis. Your body reacts before you understand it. Your chest tightens. Your breath gets a little shorter. Your brow pulls in almost on its own, like something inside you is saying, if you don't stop this now, something's going to go wrong. So you try to stop. You try to distract yourself. You grab your phone, open an app, close it, open another, go back, scroll without really seeing anything. But the thought doesn't leave. It just changes shape. Now it's not you're overthinking. And now it's, why can't I stop thinking about this? Is something wrong with me? Are other people like this too? And before you notice, you're already caught again. Maybe you know that moment, that split second when you realize you're thinking, and that becomes one more thing to think about, like your mind is spinning and you're chasing it, trying to catch up. But you never do. You just get tired. And maybe the strangest part, on the outside, nothing looks wrong. You function. You reply to messages. You go to work. You hit your deadlines. You laugh, talk, show up. But inside, there's a constant noise, a quiet background of analysis, of anticipation, of replaying things, like your mind is always one step ahead, trying to predict everything that could go wrong. And it feels useful. It even feels smart, because thinking before you act prevents mistakes, right? Prevents rejection, prevents embarrassment, prevents loss. So why does it drain you? Why does something that's supposed to protect you leave you exhausted? Maybe you've wondered that, or maybe you haven't named it yet. Maybe you just feel it, that kind of tired that doesn't come from your body, it comes from your mind, a kind of fatigue that doesn't go away with rest, because it's not a lack of energy, it's too much control. And the quietest part of all this is that this pattern didn't start today. It came from somewhere, a moment when thinking more actually made sense, when predicting helped, when analyzing kept something worse from happening. But now it doesn't turn off anymore, even when it doesn't need to, even when it doesn't help. It just keeps going, repeating, adjusting, anticipating, correcting, no pause. And maybe you've tried to fight it, tried to shut your mind down, distract yourself, ignore it, convince yourself it's nothing. But the more you try to control it, the more it grows, faster, louder, more persistent, like it has a life of its own. And this is where something important begins to show up. Maybe the problem isn't that you think too much. Maybe it's that you've learned to rely on it. Like this pattern isn't just a habit, but a kind of quiet addiction, an addiction to trying to predict, to control, to make sure nothing goes wrong, even if it costs you your peace. And the question isn't whether you do this. The question is, when during your day does it take over without you noticing? For now, just watch it. Don't try to change anything yet. Just notice when it starts. Mason wakes up before the alarm, not because he slept well, because his mind already started, still lying there, staring at the ceiling of his apartment. It's already there. You're overthinking, but he doesn't argue with it. He goes in. He starts going over the day before he even gets up. The team meeting at 10. That email that felt a little off. The message he sent last night. Still no reply. He starts running scenarios. Maybe I sounded weird. Maybe I said too much. Maybe I should have just stayed quiet. And without noticing, the day hasn't even started, and he's already trying to fix the past. In the kitchen, he makes coffee, opens his phone while the machine hums in the background. Inbox, Slack, messages. Nothing urgent, but it doesn't calm him down. Because the problem was never what's happening. It's what could happen. On the way to work, driving down the highway, radio low, Mason realizes he doesn't remember the last few minutes. He was thinking, again, now about a conversation that hasn't even happened yet, imagining what they'll ask, trying to predict how he'll respond, reworking sentences in his head like a silent rehearsal. And there's something strange about it. He believes it helps, that being prepared prevents mistakes, prevents embarrassment, prevents that specific moment, and when someone looks at you a little differently. Maybe you recognize this kind of preparation, not as planning, but as a need. Like if you don't think it through enough, something slips. And whatever that something is, it costs. Mason gets to the office, greets a few people, sits down, opens his laptop. On the outside, everything's normal. But inside, there's another screen open, one you can't see. He replays how he said good morning, if it sounded natural, if it came off forced. He replays the tone in a co-worker's reply, if there was something there, some signal, some shift, and it keeps going. During the meeting, while someone's presenting, Mason tries to focus, but part of him is busy, watching his own face, his reactions, if he's responding the right way, if he's nodding at the right time, if he's being seen the right way. And maybe here, you pause for a second and wonder, how many times have you been somewhere, but not really there? How many conversations have you lived halfway, because the other half of you was busy trying to figure out what to think? Mason heads out for lunch, drive-through, some random place. He orders on autopilot, doesn't even taste the food. His mind somewhere else now, a memory, something from years ago, high school, a small moment, but somehow it stayed. He said something in front of people, thought it was fine, but someone laughed. Not in a light way, in a way that stuck. Nothing dramatic, no one said anything directly, but that split second got recorded. And since then, there's been this constant adjustment, this invisible caution, a filter before he speaks, before he acts, even before he feels, like a part of him learned, better think it through than go through that again. And back then, it made sense. It protected him. And now that same mechanism never turns off, even when there's no threat, even when no one's judging, even when everything is normal. Mason gets back to work, opens a new task, but it takes him a while to start. Not because he's lazy, because he's trying to do it the right way, the way that won't create doubt, the way that won't leave room, the way no one can question. And while he's trying to get it right, he doesn't start, or he starts and revises and adjusts and doubts, and time passes, and the exhaustion builds, not from physical effort, but from the weight of always anticipating. At the end of the day, he goes to the gym, he trains, his body moves, but his mind keeps going, now wondering if he should have done more, if the workout was enough, if he's falling behind. Nothing is just what it is. Everything becomes something else. At night, on the couch, TV on, Mason tries to relax, but there's this strange feeling, like switching off is risky, like if he stops thinking, something important will slip through, and it keeps him there, that constant state of alert, of analysis, of trying to stay in control. And maybe you felt this too, not as something dramatic, but as a quiet background, a noise that never fully goes away, something you've learned to call normal. But let me ask you something. If this was really just overthinking, why is it so hard to stop? Why isn't it just a choice? Why, even when you notice it, do you fall right back in? Maybe it's not just thinking. Maybe it's something you learn to use, something that feels like it protects you, but slowly starts to run you. And the quietest part of all this is you don't notice when it takes over. You only notice once you're already inside it, and by then, it's not so easy to step out. Just watch it today. Don't try to fix anything. Just notice how many small decisions in your day aren't really choices. They're automatic responses to this pattern. There's a very specific moment when a thought stops being just a thought and turns into a quiet command. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no warning, just a subtle shift in tone. Before it was, you're overthinking. Then it becomes, you need to think this through before you do anything. And then, without noticing, you're already following it. Mason doesn't see when it happens, he just feels the effect. A slight tension in his body, a narrower kind of focus, a quiet sense of urgency, like something inside him is saying, pay attention. This matters. And this is where the alarm kicks in. The alarm doesn't create the thought, it repeats it. In different forms, different words, but always with the same goal. Keep you thinking, keep you adjusting, keep you trying to control what hasn't even happened yet. And the more you respond, the more it learns that it works, the more it reinforces the pattern. Mason starts to notice something strange. It doesn't matter what's going on. The thought always finds a way back. If it's not about work, it's about his body, If it's not about his body, it's about how he came across. If it's not that, it's about something that might happen later. There's always something, always another angle to analyze. Maybe you know that feeling. Like even when you solve one thing and something else shows up. Like the problem never really gets solved because it's not about the content. It's about the process. And that process has a very clear goal. Predict pain. Avoid rejection. Avoid mistakes. Avoid that split second and when something slips out of your control. And here, something starts to come into focus. This isn't random. There's logic to it. There's a part of you that built this system, that linked thinking with safety, that learned analyzing means surviving better. That part has a function, and maybe this is the first time you're seeing it this way. Not as a problem, but as an attempt to protect you, just one that never updated. Mason remembers something simple. College, first semester, new group, new people, new environment. Everything a little unstable. In one of those early moments, he said something. Nothing extreme, but he got a look. Not direct rejection, but enough. Enough to plant a doubt. Did I say too much? And in that moment, without realizing it, a decision got made, not consciously, but it stuck. Better think more before I speak. And it worked. Lowered the risk, reduced exposure, and his mind learned, stored it, repeated it, refined it, and over the year, it got sharper, became a pattern, became automatic, became a quiet identity. But it's not identity. It's a mechanism, and every mechanism has an operator. That part that creates, adjusts, and keeps this pattern running needs a name. Because as long as it stays invisible, it keeps running without being seen. Mason never had a name for it. It was just him. But when he starts looking a little closer, he notices something strange. There's a voice. Not loud, but clear. There's an intention behind the thoughts. A direction, always pulling toward analysis, replaying, anticipating, and then it starts to take shape, not as something outside of him, but as a specific function inside, a part that tries to predict what could go wrong, predict what could be misunderstood, predict what could feel off. It doesn't want him to fail, it wants him to avoid, always, and in that moment, that part gets a name, the catastrophe predictor, not because everything turns into a catastrophe, but because it treats everything like it could. It stretches possibilities. It inflates risks, it builds scenarios, all with the same goal, control. And something shifts here, because now it's not just me overthinking, it's a part doing it, with a goal, with a logic. And that creates a little space, a gap between you and the thought. Still small, because the reflex is still strong. Mason tries to ignore it, but he notices something else. The more he fights the thought, the more it comes back, faster. Stronger, like the alarm reads it as, this matters. Keep going. Maybe you've tried that too, telling your mind to stop, trying to distract yourself, trying not to think. And it does the opposite, because fighting the thought keeps you inside it. The shape changes, but the energy stays the same. And that's the trap. The thought doesn't trap you by itself. It's your relationship to it, how you respond. Following it, fighting it, trying to get rid of it, all of that keeps the cycle alive, and the catastrophe predictor doesn't mind, because as long as you're busy trying to fix it, you're still inside the system. But there's something important here, something you might have never considered. What if the thought isn't a command? What if it's just an event, something that shows up, like any other signal in your body, like a sound, like a sensation? Not something you have to follow, but that isn't fully available yet. Not completely, because the pattern is still active, strong, automatic. But now there's a small crack, a little distance, and it starts with something simple, noticing, without correcting, without arguing, without trying to improve anything, just noticing when the catastrophe predictor shows up and what it does to your behavior. The shadow has a name now, and when it has a name, it loses some power, just a little for now, because the habit of obeying it is still there, strong. And this is where something new starts to appear, still fragile, still unstable, but different. Another way of relating to all of this, not shutting it down, not fighting it, just watching. At first, it doesn't feel like anything. No light, no clarity, no sense of control. Just a slight delay, a split second between the thought and the reaction. Mason notices it in a regular moment. He's at Target, pushing a cart, not in a rush, picking up a few things, nothing important, and then it shows up. You're overthinking, but this time, something shifts. Not in the thought. The thought comes in the same way, but in the response. He doesn't go into it right away. Not because he decided not to, but because he saw it first. Like he watched the thought arrive. For a second, he just notices it. And that second feels strange because he doesn't do anything, doesn't fix it, doesn't argue, doesn't respond, just watches. And then the pattern tries to pull him back in. See, you need to think this through more. And almost automatically, he starts to. But something stays. That tiny moment of not obeying right away. And that opens something up, small, but real. Maybe you felt that too. That moment when a thought shows up and you notice it before you fall into it. And even if you fall in right after, there's a part of you that saw it, and that part is different. It doesn't try to control. It doesn't try to improve anything. It doesn't try to predict. It just notices. That part needs a name too, because just like the shadow runs on autopilot, this other presence needs to be seen. It's not strong, not yet, but it's steady, quiet. And when it shows up, it stays. It watches the thought without merging with it. It feels the body without panicking. It hears the alarm but doesn't treat it like an order. That part gets a name, the calm observer. Not because it always feels calm, but because it doesn't react automatically. It sees, and that alone starts to change things. Mason begins to notice more of these moments in the car, at the office, standing in line at Starbucks. The thought shows up. The catastrophe predictor kicks in, but sometimes there's that small space, and inside that space he doesn't have to do anything, just notice, and it feels uncomfortable because not acting feels wrong, feels careless, feels risky, like if he doesn't do something, that things might slip out of control. And sometimes he gives in, goes back to the pattern, analyzes, replays, adjusts, and everything goes back to normal, or back to what it's always been. And this part matters. This isn't regression, it's not failure, it's the pattern doing what it's always done. The difference is, now it's being seen, and seeing it changes the dynamic. Even if the behavior doesn't change right away, Mason starts trying something very subtle. When the thought shows up, he doesn't try to stop it. He just names it, catastrophe predictor, not out loud, just in his head. And that creates a little space, like the thought stops being absolute truth and becomes a message. And messages can be heard without being followed. But this doesn't fix it, not right away, because the body still reacts. The tightness in his chest still shows up. The urgency is still there, and sometimes that's enough to pull him back in. And he goes. And that's okay, because the calm observer doesn't judge. It doesn't say, you should be better at this. It doesn't demand progress. It just notes it. You went back in. No weight, no criticism. And that shifts something deep, because for the first time, there's no inner fight. There's just presence. And maybe you're starting to notice this too, not as a solution, but as a possibility. What if you don't have to beat this pattern? What if you don't have to get rid of the thought? What if you could just see it without rushing to change it, without turning it into another task, just noticing when the thought shows up and what it tries to do to you? Mason notices something else. In the moments where he just watches, even if it's only for a few seconds, the thought doesn't disappear, but it loses some of its pull, not because he fought it, but because he didn't feed it. And that's new, because it's always been the opposite. More thinking, more control, brief relief. Now it's different. Less reaction, more space, less intensity. But it's not linear. Some days, it all comes back strong. Days when the calm observer barely shows up, and the catastrophe predictor takes over. And on those days, it feels like nothing changed. Maybe you felt that too, that sense that you were getting better, and then suddenly it's all back, like none of it worked. But there's something subtle there. You notice it faster, you recognize it earlier, and that is different. Mason starts trusting the content of the thought less, and the way it shows up more. Repetitive, urgent, full of what-ifs, and that becomes a signal, not of danger, but of pattern. And when he sees that it doesn't fix everything, but it softens it, creates a little space where there used to be none. And maybe that's what's happening for you right now. Not a full shift, just the beginning of a separation between you and what your mind produces. And that space is where something new can grow. No rush, no force, just present. It doesn't start as a plan. There's no checklist, no clear goal. It starts as a kind of discomfort you decide not to ignore anymore. Mason doesn't wake up one day ready to change everything. He just starts noticing more, and that turns into a different kind of attention, not focused on fixing anything, just recognizing. On the first day, almost nothing changes. The thought shows up the same way. You're overthinking. His body reacts. The urge is there, and he goes in, analyzes, replays, tries to adjust. But at some point, in the middle of it, he remembers. Catastrophe predictor. And for a few seconds, he sees it, just sees it, and then he goes back. And that's okay, because this isn't about getting it right. It's about noticing. In the first few days, that's how it goes. Go in, notice, and step out as go back. No control, no consistency, but small cracks, small moments where the pattern isn't total. And that starts to build. Not as visible progress, but as something internal. Mason begins to recognize 3 movements, not as a technique, just as something that starts to happen when he pays attention. The first is noticing the phrase. It shows up, always with the same tone, urgent, quietly threatening. You're overthinking. You need to think this through. What if this goes wrong? Before, it was automatic. Now, sometimes he sees it coming. Like he recognizes the pattern before he's fully inside it, and that already changes the beginning. And there are days he doesn't catch it, days where the thought shows up and he's already in it, and only minutes or even hours later he realizes. That's part of it too, because noticing late is still noticing. The second movement is noticing what's underneath, not the content of the thought, but the fear, because every time the thought shows up, there's something under it, something simpler, less polished, but more honest. Fear of sounding weird, fear of messing up, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing connection, fear of not being enough in that moment. And when he looks at that, the thought changes shape. It doesn't disappear, but it gets simpler, more direct, more human. And that creates a different kind of contact, not with the problem, but with the intention. Maybe you notice that too. When you step out of the analysis and touch the real fear, there's less confusion, still uncomfortable, but quieter. The third movement, this is acting without fully obeying, not ignoring it, not avoiding it, but not following everything either, just adjusting a little, doing something, even with the thought still there, replying to a message without reading it 5 times, speaking in a meeting, even with the doubt, posting something without rewriting it over and over, letting a silence happen without filling it right away, making a decision without exhausting every possible scenario. Small things, almost invisible but different, and at first, it feels wrong, uncomfortable, like you're stepping outside the safe way of doing things, and you are. But that discomfort isn't a sign something's wrong, it's a sign something's new. Your body reacting to a path it doesn't know yet. Mason realizes he can't hold this all the time. There are days he falls all the way back in, days where the pattern takes over from the moment he wakes up. Everything becomes analysis. Everything becomes control. And on those days, it feels like he's gone backward, but something is different. He notices sooner, he recognizes the pattern while it's happening, and even if he doesn't step out, he sees it, and that matters more than it looks. Because before, he was inside it without knowing. Now, he's inside it, but aware. And that's different, because awareness, even without immediate change, already shifts the process. And here's something that doesn't seem important at first, but changes everything. The small step is what changes everything. Not the big move, not some radical shift, but that tiny adjustment where you don't check one more time, where you don't go back to review, where you don't ask for reassurance, where you let something be imperfect and leave it there. Mason starts trusting those small moments. Not because they fix everything, but because they interrupt the automatic, and interrupting the automatic creates space. And in that space, the calm observer shows up more often, not all the time, but more than before. And when it shows up, Mason doesn't necessarily feel better, not exactly, but he feels different, less trapped, less reactive, like he has options. And that shifts small things throughout his day. He spends less time stuck in repetitive loops. He comes out of spirals a little faster. He catches himself rehearsing conversations that haven't happened. He interrupts endless revising, sometimes in the middle of it. None of it is perfect, but it's real, and it adds up. And maybe you're starting to notice this too, not as a full transformation, but as a slight shift in position. Before, inside the thought. Now, sometimes looking at it, and that changes everything, because you don't have to beat the thought. You just have to stop obeying it automatically. And that weakens the pattern, not because it disappears, but because it stops being the final authority. Mason still thinks a lot. That doesn't go away, but the thoughts lose their authority. They lose that commanding tone and become suggestions, possibilities, not orders. And that softens the urgency, softens the pressure, not always, but enough to breathe. And over time, this starts to reach bigger things, decisions, conversations, the way he carries himself. He speaks with less rehearsal. He lets small mistakes exist without fixing everything. He lets conversations end without replaying them for hours. He trusts the moment more than the prediction, not because he became someone else, but because he stopped responding from the same pattern every time. And that creates variation, and variation creates freedom, not total, but enough. Enough to live without always bracing for the next mistake. And maybe that's the point, not to stop thinking, but to stop depending on thinking, to feel safe. And that doesn't happen all at once. It happens in ordinary days, in small moments, in line, in the car, in a quick conversation, in silence, before sending a message, right before deciding not to check one more time. And in each of those moments, there's a choice, small, almost invisible, but real, to notice, to feel, and to act anyway, without waiting for your mind to give you permission. It's Tuesday, nothing special. Mason's sitting in a Starbucks parking lot, engine off, phone in his hand. He just wrote a message, simple, nothing important, but he hasn't sent it. His thumb hovers over the button, and the thought comes, fast, automatic. You're overthinking, but maybe just check it one more time. His body reacts right away, a slight tightness in his stomach, that feeling of doubt, like there's something there he missed. The urge is clear. Go back, read it again, change a word, adjust the tone, make sure. But this time, he pauses, not for long, just enough. He takes a breath, looks at the screen, and recognizes it. Catastrophe predictor, not as judgment, just naming it, and something shifts, not the thought, but the space around it. Mason doesn't try to get rid of it, doesn't try to convince himself everything's fine. He just watches what's happening, and for the first time, he lays it out, simply. No theory, no explanation, just clarity. Line 1, maybe this message sounds off. Line 2, fear of being misunderstood and of coming across wrong. Line 3, send it is without checking again. He sits there for a few seconds. The discomfort doesn't go away. The doubt is still there. His body still wants control, but he doesn't follow it, not all the way. He taps the button, sends it, and right away, the alarm tries to come back. You should have checked it one more time. But now, something's different. He sees it. It doesn't pull him in the same way. It doesn't spiral. It just moves through. Slow, not completely gone, but not in control. Mason leans back in his seat, looks through the windshield, and for the first time that day, there's some quiet. Not total, but enough. And maybe you're noticing something too. This didn't take control. It didn't take certainty. Just a small moment of presence and one simple action that didn't follow the full pattern. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-changing, but real and available today. Maybe it was never really about thinking too much. Maybe it's about how much you learned to trust this pattern, how repetition became your reference point, like analyzing, predicting, reviewing was the only safe way to exist. And it makes sense. This didn't come out of nowhere. At some point it protected you, helped you avoid something, helped you adjust, helped you stay in control when control felt necessary. That's not weakness. It's adaptation. But what once protected you now holds you back. Not in obvious ways, not in dramatic ways, but quietly, constantly, in small decisions, in simple moments, in choices that don't even feel like choices. And maybe the most important thing you've seen here is that this doesn't need to be fought. It doesn't need to be eliminated. It doesn't have to disappear for you to have a little more freedom, because the thoughts can still show up. The catastrophe predictor can still try. The alarm can still go off, but now there's something that wasn't there before, a space, small but enough, between the thought and your response. And inside that space, you don't have to obey automatically. You can see it, you can feel it, and even with the discomfort, you can act differently, without waiting for your mind to approve it, without needing certainty, just choosing a small step again and again. And over time, that changes the relationship. Not with the thoughts, but with yourself, because you start to notice your mind isn't in charge of everything, that the first impulse doesn't get the final say, that there's a part of you that can observe without getting pulled under. The shadow has a name, and when it has a name, it loses some of its power, and the calm observer doesn't defeat the shadow. It lives alongside it. It listens without obeying. It notices without stepping in. That doesn't create perfection, but it creates presence, and presence is where real change begins. So maybe today you don't need to change anything. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to improve. Just notice in the simplest moments when the pattern shows up, when the thought takes over, and for a second, just see it. No rush, no force, because that's how it starts. Slow, almost invisible, but real. And if some part of this stayed with you, stay with it. There's more quiet here than it seems, and maybe you're not alone in this.